So for those who are joining us for the first time, we're Bettermode. Previously, we were known as Tribe. We rebranded to Bettermode back in December 2022. So at Bettermode, what we do is that we bring in different customer engagement tools like ideation, discussions, forums, help center, events into one single platform where you can streamline your customer experience and strengthen the customer relationships. While we're helping our customers build their communities, we're also building our own community, which can be accessed from bettermode.com/hub. And all the webinars can be accessed in this community. And of course, you can register for the upcoming webinars as well. And now our guest today is Max Pate, who is leading community and also support at SuperHi. So Max has an amazing story to tell, really inspiring. I would let Max take over from here and introduce himself, and then we will get started with the presentation. So Max, take it away.
Yeah, hey everyone. Very excited to be here. I'll just go by sharing my screen right now so I can give a little introduction on who I am. Can everyone see this? Thumbs up. Cool. Awesome. So yeah, a little bit about me. For those who don't know, my name is Max. I used to freelance for 5 years in the design and advertising space. Before I got into community, I kind of fell into this space accidentally just by having like really bad job burnout as a freelancer and wanting something differently, and then stumbled upon a freelance community, became the first freelance or community manager, and then realized that this is a whole career that I had no idea about and just fell in love with it. And I'm currently the senior community lead over at SuperHi. So SuperHi is an online education platform. We teach students design, code, project management courses. And outside of community, I like to do stuff such as DJing. My friend and I, we live on the same street here in San Diego, we just DJ as a hobby, create mixes, and just do it for fun. Music has always been like a very big passion of mine ever since I was young. So it's fun to continue that way with DJing. And I also coined the nickname One Hand Wonder Man. For those that don't know me either, I was born with one hand. So I'm missing my left hand. And when I was freelancing, I was like, I need a cool nickname so I can separate myself from others who are doing the same work that I am. So I was just like, why not lean into calling myself the One Hand Wonder Man? So those are a couple of fun facts about me. But yeah, let's begin. So first things first, Pratish was mentioning this a little bit earlier, but the reason why I brought up this topic and want to talk about it and why I think it's important is because given the year of 2023, we're seeing mass layoffs of community people. We're seeing budgets being cut. We're seeing, a lot of community people just fighting for anything, scraps that they can have, and just really trying to show the return on investment, really trying to just prove that, hey, what we're doing is valuable and we need it to exist. And so I thought, hey, this is a great topic to talk about. It's very timely. And I just wanted to share some tips and strategies that have worked for me so far in my journey. So on the agenda today, we're going to be talking about a few things. One being, what is your community? Two, narrowing your focus, regular check-ins, getting your team involved, and developing safe spaces. So first thing first, what exactly is your community? And what I mean by this is, why does it exist? What is the why? What is the goal? Why do members feel like they should join, and what's keeping them around? I think if you're just starting out as starting the community or have just launched one, you should have an answer to this. The same as if you're been in the community for a long time, and it's good to always reflect back on these questions. What exactly is our community? Why is it? What's the purpose of it? Why is it needed? I think we should always know our why behind this, because it helps with everything that we do. It helps with our strategies. It helps with being able to show the return on investment, keeping the retention, because we know exactly why this community exists in the first place. And with that, there are different community types. So for example, I'll run through a couple in just a bit, but and these aren't necessarily every single community type that exists today. These are just a few common ones that we have seen, time and time again. One of them being community of practice. So, a group of people who share a common concern, set of problems, interest in a topic, and just help and support one another. A customer community, a place for customers to connect for discussions, answer questions, brainstorm ideas. A product community, space for focus on support, product questions, discussions with existing users, and other types. So brand, creator, DevRel, etc. Not just there's more. I just want to kind of condense that. And so I think why I'm bringing this up is that along with our why, we should kind of know like where our community falls under. For example, like is our community practice, or are we more focused on like a product community? I was listening to a recent podcast from Brian and Erica from In Before the Lock, and they kind of mentioned that like, hey, really great communities like encompass all this in one. In a sense, like it's not just one thing or the other. And while I do agree with that, I do think that it is still important to know like your main driver behind the community, like what are we trying to do? And at SuperHi, for example, I would say we're a pretty hybrid community. So like depending on the user journey of where our members fall under, sometimes I would say it's part product, part community of practice. So some members come in just for questions and support around the product itself, while some members who have kind of gone through the courses, gone through the product, are now kind of jumping in for the community of practice. So we have like a big career advice question. We have a big like chat freelance and helping members on their like career journey. And so some members just stick around for that. So it's kind of like we have both sides, two different, I guess, community types. And but we still know like what our goals are for each, right? So what are we trying to do with our product, and what are we trying to do with the community of practice? And something that I am guilty of, which I'm sure a lot of us are, and a lot of us can't necessarily help it at this point because of just what I mentioned earlier, budget cuts, and just the amount of work that we have to do on a daily basis. But narrowing our focus, right? So like, I think we're always doing a lot, especially if you're a small community team, you're running events, you're doing reporting, you're doing operations side, you're trying to think of strategy, and there's just so many things. And a lot of times just like, we don't necessarily know what's working well because there's just too many things on our plate. And so my recommendation, and something I've been trying to get better at, is to meet with my manager and the leadership team on a regular basis to get a real sense of like, okay, what are their goals, and how does the community align with that, so that maybe we're only doing a couple things at a time, but I know that if we achieve these things, that they're going to be like, oh, great, the community's working. And sometimes like, like I spent a lot of time running events and creating an event strategy, because I knew like one of our goals as a community was like to keep retention high. And while we were waiting to develop new content and courses and things like that, my thing was like, okay, like I need to brainstorm and implement ideas to keep members around while other content is being developed. And that wouldn't necessarily have happened if I haven't had that meeting. And I could have focused my time on other things that might have been cool for the community, but necessarily weren't the main driver that my boss and team were really looking at in terms of like, what does success mean? And so I think meeting with our team regularly, get an idea of what is what they want, and how we can align that with the community, and then narrowing our focus on that, and just making sure that all that stuff aligns. Otherwise, sometimes we're just spinning our wheels, and we're exhausted, and we don't know necessarily if this is exactly what is going to move the needle for the business. And one way, when we are thinking of throwing, building products for our community, building initiatives, resources, things like that, incorporating user research is key. I think, one thing is that we should always be building with our community members. Yes, we might like have a lot of good data and be able to see the conversations that are happening, and be able to like kind of guess like, okay, like what do our members need, and kind of develop things around that. but I still think it's really important to incorporate user research into pretty much everything that we do. And just by knowing their main pain points, knowing what they're struggling with, and like what we're building, how is that going to help them? And one mistake I see with this is like when members do start user research, it's like, okay, we're just going to focus on the super users and interview them. And while that is great, while I think that's a good subset of community members to interview, I think that there's more to that. So what are the members that like used to be active but aren't active anymore? Like, how are they feeling? Will this get them to come back? Maybe interviewing the members who've just joined in the past 30 days, just to kind of get a new perspective on what their views are in the community and like what's going to keep them around, or members who've just been part of the community for a year plus, and getting, feedback from them. And is this going to continue to help with retention and keeping them coming around, or is this going to kind of maybe push them out? I think it's just really important to interview as many different types of members as you can, and then incorporating that feedback to the wider team so that they're aware of what the community's feedback is and how we can start implementing to build better products for them. And I'll touch upon this in a little bit, but this is a great way also to get your team involved in community. So, if you're working with a product, if you're working with engineering or marketing, you bring them into these community interviews, let them sit in the background, and to like learn more from members to like, what are their main pain points. And this is a great way just like kind of introduce them into some of the community work that you're doing. And beyond just user research, I think it's also important to do regular check-ins with your members. So one-on-ones are one of my favorite things to do. And I try to make that a goal to at least do a certain amount per month. I know, like, again, we're super busy and things happen. So you don't need to necessarily do like 50 one-on-one check-ins every single month. It could just be a select few. Maybe I'm going to pick one person from each one of our personas or groups and kind of check in with them. But I think this is a great way to get feedback early on and catch things that might not be working for the community that you might not be aware of, or to just get feedback early and be able to like fix things if there's issues, and to just check in with your members to like really see like and build a rapport. Be like, okay, cool. Like, I appreciate your time for feedback. And they feel special to just have that one-on-one conversation with you, where they might not necessarily be posting a lot in the community, but they're going to be open, more likely with you on a one-to-one call. This is also a really great way to capture some testimonials and share with your team. So as a community manager, if you're doing a one-on-one with a member and they're like, hey, like the community is great, you're doing an awesome job, like I feel so supported being here, take that screenshot and share it with the team. It's a great way to like share with them, like, hey, like I just got this amazing feedback from a community member. It's going to show your team like, okay, cool, like this, you're doing an awesome job. And it's just going to be able to create that like momentum of capturing like, the awesome work that you're doing as a community manager. And I touched upon this a little bit, but getting your team involved, I think, is very important. One way, my main reason too is that when you have your team involved and they're like participating in the community, I think it helps on the community side because they get to interact with just more than you as a community manager. Like they get to chat with maybe a product person, a marketing person, events person. So like they get to just see more of the community, the team behind the scenes, and they just feel like, okay, cool, I can like talk to these people. I can talk to the people behind the company. And two, I think as yourself as a community manager, it helps with you of just like bringing in your teammates in there, because they're going to see the great work that's happening in the community, and they're going to be able to vouch for you too, of being like, okay, like we need this community, it's working. A lot of questions are being answered, or we're having to spend less time on support because of this is happening. And so like the more eyeballs that you have from your team, and they can actually see like the stuff that's working, the more that they'll go to bat for you, like when times are kind of tough and you might need to ask for an increased budget or something that's going to help with your community needs. And ways to get your team involved. And something that I found too is that like, team members actually want to participate. They just kind of sometimes feel like they don't know where to start. And so like one way that I would kind of reframe this is to think about onboarding your team the same way you would onboard a new community member, right? So like creating documentation of like, okay, like when you join the community, like here's some steps to follow if you wanted to introduce yourself, if you wanted to participate in these type of channels based on your interest. Like this is kind of like give them a channel guide of like, what's active and like how they can participate. I think sharing documentation and just being able to hand something off to your team is going to make them a lot more comfortable, because if you're just like, hey, join the community. If I'm not a community person, I might be like, like I want to, but I feel like I don't know what to do, where do I post? And so sharing documentation is really key to getting them involved. And then when you are hosting like community meetups or events, like invite your team to join those, just to sit in the background to kind of get a glimpse of like what those events are, and to just see some of the community members. You can also work with your team to host like co-events. So for example, like office hours. So you bring in, I always mention like product, but you bring in like head of product from your team to host an office hours. And then maybe people in your community who are like product managers or people aspiring to be one can join that event to ask questions. It could be like a Q&A, like asking anything. But it's a nice way to get like your team member involved, and you can kind of co-host an event with them. And then beyond that too, like just encouraging participation of, if there's a post that they can help out with, and they're comfortable, you can tag them in the post. You can just copy the link of it wherever it is and message them directly, be like, hey, like we got this question. I really think you would be able to answer this based on XYZ. Would love it if you can jump in and answer it on, as a team member, and just encouraging that participation. And funnily enough, like I've seen that work where I had to do that, I think in the beginning a lot, just like send them a post and have them come in. And now I just notice that some of my team members who want to participate just jump in and do it. And I don't have to send them that anymore. Like they just are checking the channels and they're participating the way that they want to. So it's just something that like helps get the ball rolling. And then once they're in and they can kind of see what's happening and just get a glimpse of all the great, things that are happening. And then again, I think that they're going to just vouch and see like the huge benefits of why this community exists in the first place. And as your community grows, one thing I've seen is that some members just might participate less or want to be around less just because, they might have been around in the beginning when it was 500, 1,000 people, and maybe it's like 5,000 now. And they just feel like, I don't know if I want to post messages or share a lot because there's just a lot more people here than what there were before. And so one thing to keep in mind for retention is just continuing to develop safe spaces for all members, right? And so one way of doing this is creating some sort of like micro communities within your community. For example, we've seen a lot of people were chatting about fitness in the community. So we were like, okay, cool. Like there's a good amount of people chatting about fitness. Why don't we ask the member who kind of started this conversation if they wanted to co-run this micro community, this group of a fitness club, and recruit other community members to join and kind of keep this thing going. And so that was something that, in that space, I think it was around like 30, 40 people. So it's like very, very small, but it really like everyone was participating. Everyone was posting a lot. People felt comfortable. They're sharing around like, one goal of fitness. And so it was a cool way to see like members who might not be active in a lot of the other channels to continue to show up on a daily basis in these micro communities, because they just wanted to, chat with others with that shared interest and not be in this huge group of 5,000 plus people. Another way that we found has been working really well is like, as I mentioned before, like we have a very popular career advice channel where members can ask anything around career advice, like job hunting, resumes, questions that they have to deal with their team and their boss. And some members just don't want to ask those questions because either they might have teammates in the community too, or their boss might be in there, or they just like, I don't know if I want to ask this, and have it attached to my profile. So what we do is we have a anonymous type form. So members can submit a question through the type form. It will come to someone on a community team. We'll review it and then we'll post it on their behalf. So they get still ask a question. They still get to participate, but they don't feel like they don't have to have it associated to their name, and so they can ask that way, and it still encourages a lot of participation from other members who want to help and jump in and answer those questions with their advice and insight too. And so it's a way for people to encourage participation without necessarily having to have it attached to your profile, which I think is really important, because it gets them continuing to be involved, and they just want to participate. And so like giving your members control of smaller spaces, like co-running small spaces with them, giving them anonymous options of participating if that was a thing that made sense and they wanted to do, and continue to just monitor and see like, okay, like if our community is growing a lot, if it is way bigger than it was a year or two ago, like how can we continue to create these micro communities, these safe spaces for members to participate in, where they feel the most comfortable in doing so. So some main takeaways today is like narrowing your focus, right? So meeting up with your management team and to really get narrowed down on like, what are the goals, what's going to make them happy, what's going to like show return on investment and allow them to potentially give extra funding or really just go to bat for what the work that you're doing, and follow whatever those goals are and work together as a team. Building community with your team and your members, right? So like doing these one-on-one member chats, getting your team members involved, bringing them into like user research conversations, bringing them into other conversations, so the community can feel like that, hey, like I can talk to anyone on the team, and that is special because that's not like at other communities I'm involved in. Host regular check-ins with your members, and continue to develop safe spaces. Always look at what's happening in the community and continue to monitor, like, okay, how can we continue to make it a place where members feel comfortable participating, wanting to continue to come back and stick around, which I think is the most important thing. And one quote that I love and I try to keep in the back of my mind as a community manager, and I think one thing that like we do as a lot as community people, is from Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that is like, I think, the epitome of a community manager. Like we, like when we make our members feel something great and just feel like that they're meant to be around and participate, and they get in the value, and they just feel great about being a member of the community, they're always going to stick around. And so that's something I always like strive by. And so, yeah, thank you. My email, my Twitter, I didn't put my threads on there. I use threads now, but it's like just same like Max B, and my portfolio. And yeah, I just appreciate Pratish having me here to talk.
Thank you so much, Max. That was amazing. I
Yeah.
really loved the part where you shared giving members control, right? And letting them build micro communities, and also loved the part about having check-ins. So I'm happy to move to the Q&A section, and incidentally, the question is from Heather, who has a question about check-ins. So the question is, with member check-ins, what ratio of the older unengaged members are you targeting? I would love to figure out why they disengaged, but understanding new member and engaged member feedback is very important to the now. Curious about your process here.
Yeah, so when I'm doing check-ins, let's just say I'm doing 10 check-ins a month, right? To just start off with that easy number. So, and I have like I have like 5 groups of different members I'm trying to reach. Like if that's a new member, an old member, someone who super engaged, someone who might have not participated in a while, and then someone else, like maybe like our old like ambassadors or people who like have run events or things like that. So I'm gonna probably just pick like I'm gonna just do it evenly across the board. 2 people from each group. Just that way I get to make sure I'm asking people equally across the board, and to just and also to see like that there's no necessarily like bias in one group versus the other. So like if I'm gonna just interview, for example, if I'm interviewing 10 people and I'm going to just interview, if I would instead just interview like 7 people who are super users and 3 people who weren't, I might get like just different sets of data that necessarily isn't telling me the truth in a lot of things, just because I'm heavily weighted on the super users and not on other people. So I might think everything is great, everything's cool. And that like a couple people might have like feedback and questions that isn't necessarily like, in my mind, wasn't like a big deal, but it actually is, because I just wasn't taking enough sample size from that group. So I try to do it equally. Again, this is something I try to do on a monthly basis too. But like I said, like things come up as community managers, like we're constantly like being bombarded with a lot of stuff. And so I just think as regularly as you can do these check-ins, I think that's, the most important. If you're like, okay, like I can't do 10 this month, but I can do 5, then do 5. I think just being consistent with it and just like continuing to check with your members, and doing, and maybe if like, you have that time and the bandwidth of doing like extra follow-up with the people that you've already done one-on-ones with, like maybe you haven't spoken to a member in 6 months. So good time to like just recheck in with them, of being like, hey, how are things going? I'd love to like chat with you more about like your experience, things like that. I hope that answered the question.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, another question is about creating smaller spaces. So the question is,
Mm-hmm.
when I create smaller spaces for members, and by request, I believe the members are requesting to create those spaces, but it seems like the participation dies quickly. So do you feel
Mm-hmm.
responsible at all for moderating or making those spaces as engaging as the rest of your community? And how many people do you consider before creating a space like that? I believe what should the member size for creating a smaller space within a community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something I've definitely seen myself too, of just like members requesting channels or things. Uh, and while that's all great and fun, like it just dies within like a month. And so sometimes like one workaround that I've had for that is, instead of it being like our community is now on Discord, but it was on Slack. And so on Slack, like one thing that we were doing was like, instead of making it like a public channel that members can join, I was like, okay, like let's just create a private channel or a private group DM with 4 or 5 people, 6 people, like whatever amount it was. And we'll monitor that for like the next month or two. And depending on that feedback and that participation, then we'll make that an actual like micro community group where members can join. But I kind of like made that stipulation before, of just being like, okay, like this, actually make sure like this is something that like you're going to want to participate in. And that's something that I encourage our members that do want to start these micro communities, that like, hey, like if you do want to start it, we will support and we want to encourage, you on this journey, but we also want you to like help co-run this channel with us, because it gives them autonomy to doing that. And then it allows them to like, it gives them wanting to like come back and participate too. So, but yeah, I would say if the group is relatively small, like anywhere between 5 to 20 people, 15, see if you can like maybe start like a private channel or a group message, and just kind of keep tabs of that, see if like that's going to be a consistent thing. And then if it is, then it's like, cool, this thing's working. Let's create this like to become like an official like micro community or group or whatever it is, how you have it laid out in your community. Because at that point you kind of went through the test process and kind of seen that like this thing is working. Because yeah, like one thing that when we were just starting a bunch of these channels and groups, like a month later they would just be dead. And a member that comes into our community kind of can see them, and it's just like, I don't want members to come in and just see like a bunch of empty channels that no one's participating in.
Do you see when members are requesting for new or smaller spaces within the community, do you see them asking for some kind of responsibility of co-building with you, as in they would create the programming for that particular space or moderate, manage that particular space?
Yeah, I see them do wanting to participate in that because uh, you know, they're they have either come with us to that, they've brought that idea to us and they're like, hey, like I would love to like co-run this channel. And even if they didn't like necessarily like outwardly say like I want to co-run it, I kind of go back to them and be like, hey, like this is a really great feedback and a cool community that we could like build within our bigger ecosystem. Would you like to participate in this? Because we would love that like support. And in all honesty, in order to like run like a really efficient, like supportive like micro community, like we would need your support to do this. And so you kind of like show them like, hey, like, if this is something that they really want to do, to get involved. And it kind of shows too, like right off the bat too, like how, I guess, serious is their request, right? Because sometimes people are like, oh, like I want to do this or I want to do that. And like when you kind of help put the ball back in the court, they're like, never mind, like I don't want to do it. And so this kind of can give you like a sense of like, okay, cool. Like this is actually something that a member requested and they really want to help like run with us. And so like this make it happen.
How do you ask a member
Mm-hmm.
promote your brand, promote your community, sort of spread the word about your brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think one way to do that is creating um, creating opportunities for them to do that. So like for like, if running like user programs, uh, ambassador programs where members are involved more in like maybe recruiting members to the community or getting people in. I know like some communities give members affiliate links, right? So that they can, and if it's like a paid community, that they can like earn revenue based on like people that join the community based from their links and invites. So there's ways of doing it that way. We kind of do it. We don't necessarily do it that way, but like one thing that we've seen is that like just members will want to share their work from like stuff that they've done in the community on their socials, and that kind of helps like spread the word that way. So like we've thrown different events such as like a critique session, right, where members are getting together to work on like a fake design challenge, and it's a small group of members, and then they end up sharing that work on their socials, being like, oh, look what I did in this community, and that ends up becoming like a really great like word of mouth of like this community, they're working on like cool projects and there's like courses attached to it. So like, let me like, maybe like I'm interested in joining that, or I want to learn more about that. So I think there's just different ways of doing that based on one, if it's paid membership and how you can incentivize members to recruit people. And if it's not, of just getting members involved, but still feeling some sort of like ownership, and blinking on the word, but of autonomy, of just like allowing them to like how they want to share their work that they do inside the community, like on their socials.
And do you have any kind of framework or process that you follow to identify these kind of people who would be willing to spread the word about your brand in your community?
I mean, mainly like what we use. So like for our analytics, we've been using Common Room and other community tools, and so like being able to just like get a glimpse of like member participation and engagement rate, and then being able to be like, okay, cool, like these are the members that we already see on a regular basis participating, and now it's confirmed by data that we want to like recruit those people. But again, I think also too, when you are recruiting people to join become of other like programming or things like that, you can ask those questions in your one-on-one interviews with them. Like that could be a question, like, hey, like if there was opportunities for you to participate in the community, would you want to do that? And having them be like, yes, I would love to learn more. And that gives you an answer of like, okay, cool, this person's going on the list for like when we have things that we think that they could be a match for, or no. And then now, like, cool, like they don't want to participate more, so I'm not going to ask them to do that. So I think, yeah, when you're doing these one-on-one member check-ins, if you're even just doing like a big survey to your members too, like that could be a question that you're asking them just to get like a broader sense of how many members want to participate. But yeah, just asking them, just straight up asking them, being like, hey, like, do you want to participate more? Like, we think you would be a great fit because of this. And just let them, answer, say yes or no, and then get them involved that way.
Right. Okay, so I have one more question here. So how do you accurately measure the return from the community? So we are running all these different programs. Do you have any metrics around measuring that return from the community?
Yeah. So, I mean, for ours, because we're just like really focused necessarily more on like retention and just keeping members around, just using metrics of like, okay, like if we're running a program, like how many members, let's just say like an event, for example, right? How many members have registered, how many people have attended, how long have they watched for, are they like participating afterwards in the community? Because you can kind of see like these members that have watched an event, like are they going back in the community to discuss, and kind of like following that, and like just over time you're able to see more data of like, okay, this event series is working because we know that we have on average 200 people that register. We have about 50% view rate who like people who like actually watch it live. And then they end up staying on the video for, let's just say like the events are an hour long, and they're staying on for like, 45 to 50 minutes on a regular basis. So you can kind of look and be like, cool, like I know that this is working because of this data. But yeah, just being able to like, depending on like what the community goals are, and just finding like data points to tell that story. And giving yourself time too, right? So if you're launching a new community program, and if it's not necessarily clicking in the first couple of weeks, like, or it's not like hitting your target goal right away, like just let it run a little bit and then kind of go back. I think a lot of times we don't give ourselves enough time to really build a program out. We just get like frustrated or something happens and we kind of stop it right away. But like, if it's not necessarily working the way you want it to in the first, early on, that's a good time to get feedback from participation to see, okay, like maybe we're doing something that like just needs a little bit of correction, and then that's going to encourage more participation. And so instead of just like completely cutting out the program or whatever initiative it was. But yeah, let it run a little bit of time, use that data, and then either be like, this is a great investment, we should continue this, or be like, hey, like, we tried it out, it wasn't really working, this is why, and so now we're going to kind of pivot to the next thing. And I think if you're able to tell the story either way, like it's still going to be beneficial, because you're going to be able to speak to like, okay, like this is like why we tried it, this is how we measured it, and then this is like how we're going to either continue it or switch to something else.
Right. That really resonates with me, because we have a newsletter called Community Memo, which is on LinkedIn, on our LinkedIn page. So in our previous issue, we had a topic around business growth. I believe that also applies to communities. So the essence of the topic was that companies who grow, they grow because they're doing something consistently. At some point, it pays off.
I see one from Katie. So like, if your leadership's team time and focus are elsewhere, and it's hard to get them on a call to determine community purpose, how do you recommend we go about determining the purpose? I mean, if it's hard to get them on a call, which definitely can be the case, and things come up and happen and priorities shift, I would just continue to like ask them to be like, okay, like we need to do this because of this. Like I feel really like strongly that we need to determine like the goals of our community in order for this to be successful. And if we don't have that meeting, if we don't have that conversation, like I just feel like we're going to be at a loss here. And just being open and transparent about that, and just going to bat for the community work. And again, that might not work 100% of the time. Your team might just still be like, like whatever, like we'll get to it when we get to it. But that's either going to be like a sign for you to just know that like, hey, like I'm pushing for something as much as I can. And like, there's that only so point that like I need to meet with the leadership team on to to get this across the finish line. Or two, unfortunately, like it's going to give you a sign of like, okay, does your leadership team even really care? And sometimes like I think it's really important to get buy-in from your team. Like, that's the kind of whole point of this. But sometimes there are just losing battles, right? And there are just some times where like, no matter what you do, no matter how you try to communicate with your team, no matter all this stuff, like they're just going to like make excuses or de-shift priorities, or they're going to like, make you do all this stuff. And then when it comes down to it, they're going to like do something else. And so I think that's just a sign to be like, okay, like are my efforts really here being useful? Or is it the best use of my time? Or do I need to look for maybe like another role or like another place to work? Because it's kind of like working with a bad client, right? Like sometimes instead of just like trying to change their minds on all this stuff or all these things, like your energy can be focused elsewhere, where it's just gonna be like, okay, like there's other people out there that get this and I just need to find them and make it happen. And not to say like everything's going to be easy and don't do a challenge, but I think like if you're constantly trying to get a hold of your leadership team, if you're making the effort, if you're doing all this stuff, like also just remind yourself like, hey, like I'm doing what I can, and not all of it's on you to make it happen. How do you handle live reporting? I don't know. Might need more clarification on that. But I also don't. Yeah, I would say like more like, is that like presenting data live, or is that because that's the case, like I personally normally just like I'll send in the reports ahead of time to my team before we get on a call, before we do anything, and then kind of let them like see it beforehand, and then we'll go over it on the call itself. Just because a lot of times they'll come back to me with questions beforehand and I can already be prepared for, where on a call, when you're doing something live or when you're doing things like that, like it's just sometimes it's a life reporting. Maybe that was
So the
typo. When you're
I see. No, I believe, so Vinay has added some more context to it. So when we're looking for week over week and interdepartmental content to benchmark and forecast data, do you have live reporting dashboards implemented?
Currently, yeah, like that's something I don't have, but that's not a bad idea at all. Like that's something like, and I'll be honest with you too, like I would say like if I, when I talk about my weakness, like it's probably I'm always looking to get better and just reporting and data and making sure like all that stuff is in place, which I think is also another like big value add of why community operations is such a great, like so great to have on your team, and also like great for like the support so that they can help on that, so they can help create these systems in place. But yeah, we don't currently have those dashboards implemented. And then I saw Jared ask a question about launching a community for a beta group of 1,000 people. Any advice on pushing engagement in the beginning stages? Yeah, so I would say like one thing for pushing engagement in beginning stages is some members like don't always want to participate first, right? They're like, like, do I post this question here? And so like maybe it's like reaching out to members individually as part of your onboarding process and be like, hey, like here are channels. If you have data on like their interests and like what they're active in and like their background, like where they work, and just send them a message like, hey, like would love if you would post a question here. And then once members start to like post questions, then to get, maybe tag some other members in the community or send those members in the community individual messages to encourage them to go back and like answer questions in there. Like that's something that like I do a lot. I continue to do a lot as our community grows and have done it, since like early too. And so I think sometimes they just need like an extra nudge, or there's like, oh, I didn't see that post that was happening. Because some members are just busy, and if it is a Slack community or they're like part of other groups, they just might not see it. And then also just like, it's like, cool, like the community manager reached out to me and wanted me to participate. So now I like feel like I really want to jump in and answer. So I would say like, yeah, just in those early members, who join, like just encouraging them, talking to them, checking in and like asking them like, if they want to participate. And also too, like maybe creating some prompts around participation, right? So like, is there any community rituals that you can do on a weekly basis? Like on a Monday, can you do like some sort of like accountability check-in and do that on a consistent basis that members will know like, okay, every Monday, I want to write my goals down. Or like, maybe like Fridays are sharing your wins, things like that, like creating some sort of like consistent content calendar of community rituals. And then slowly but surely that starts to like members start to see that and they start to like want to participate more in those.
Yeah. And something also we also recommend to our customers is to sort of create a map of the journey that you envision your current members to take, especially in the beginning phases when you are starting with a beta group. And then create the all kind of triggers that you need to do to sort of help those members take that path. So it could be it could be emails, it could be in-app notifications that prompts the members to take certain actions. So that could be another way to get the ball rolling.
No, definitely.
So yeah, Max, go ahead.
Cool. No, I was just saying, no, this has been great. Thank you so much for like having me on this.
Awesome. Yeah, I believe we got some really interesting questions as well. And thanks for sharing your insights as well as answering all these questions. Okay, so
Yeah.
we'll meet in the next webinar, and thank you all for joining. Take care. Cheers.